All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Flag of the United States. Republic for which God, indivisible. Morning, everyone. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda for today's meeting.
I would like to make a motion. Two items I'd like.
All right, there's been a motion to amend today's agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? And I'll call the question. All those in favor of amending today's agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
So the items are topic for discussion related to development of interactive virtual. The second item is
Add an item under new business called discussion on Residence Academy. Second. And then the second one will be change job descriptions. Larry?
I have two items also to add. They're committee appointees for Parks and Rec. Susan Holt, first term.
That's Gene Higgins for Parks and Rec and Susan Holt for Environmental and Natural Assets.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, Gene Higgins. I thought two. So we have two items then.
Then I have none.
There you go.
Two are.
So Gene Higgins, Parks and Rec.
Susan Holt for Environmental and Natural Assets, first term.
Okay. Right, any other changes? All right, 4 changes as noted. Residence Academy, changes in job descriptions, and appointments for Gene Higgins for Park and Rec and Susan Holt for Environmental and Natural Assets. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of a motion to amend the agenda as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda is officially amended for today. All right, next item on the agenda is approval of minutes from the December 4th, 2019 regular meeting. I'll entertain a motion to accept those minutes as presented.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of accepting the minutes from the December 4th, 2019 regular meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are accepted. Next item is President's remarks. First of all, Happy New Year to everyone. Looking forward to a productive 2020. 2 quick things. Number one, I will dispel any rumors that we have a change in the dress code for 2020. We had pictures today, so we will return to business casual at the very next opportunity. 2 other things I'd like to mention. We need folks for the search committee. The search committee is individuals who canvass the community for individuals who would consider running for the board, acting as a candidate for the board. So anybody that's interested in serving on the search committee, no prerequisites, no experience other than being able to reach out to the community and find out if there's any interest in getting additional candidates for the upcoming election. The second item I'd like to mention too is the strategic planning committee. That committee has been a little bit dormant over the past better part of a year. We're trying to get it back up and running. So we want to see if there's any opportunity for folks to volunteer their time for the Strategic Planning Committee. The process for applying for a committee is on the website. You can certainly reach out to myself, anybody on the board, or the general manager, and we can guide you in the right direction. Okay, so.
Mr. President, I just would add that we're not trying to solicit a chair, so if you're worried about that, you don't have to be. We do have a chair and 2 members, but I really need several more. So, thank you.
Director Rogers is the board liaison to the Strategic Planning Committee. So anyway, thank you. That's it for President's remarks. The next item on the agenda, announcements of our email votes. Colette.
There was unanimous agreement to do 2 email votes. One was on a motion to authorize a funding request for a drainage pipe replacement at Clipper Court. And the other one was a motion to authorize funding for drainage pipe replacement on Border Links Road. Both motions passed unanimously.
So noted. Please enter that in the record. Next item on the agenda, the GM report. John.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, so the first slide, our scorecard. Let's look where we're moving the ball. Let's see where it's going on. Let's start off with the clubhouse. Team has it out on track. I have it as on track, May 2020. The estimated cost, the budget, $1.6 million to date. We have spent $266,000 rounded. We constantly monitor this number. There is much oversight on it from the board. At any given time, at any hour of the day, I can tell you basically where we're at on it. And right now, I'm very happy to say we're under budget. There is just a few items left that we're addressing. Team effort, utilizing different contractors, the expertise from the volunteers that we've received, as well as our own employees, which we do charge to the project, is one of the many reasons why we are coming in on the budget. Cart Barn, on track. Basically, they started a little late, so we might be a week or two late on that, but they did start with it. If you go down, you can see the frames going up. It was on the Wayland side, but I'd rather wait a few weeks to get the expert that they have that does it. That also, we tracked the cost. We're on track for that $400,000. Craft building basically is finished. Hope to cross it off. Debbie did just receive the final payment bill invoice. You can see there where she brought that project in, and it was a team effort. On track, under the estimated budget, approved budget. Police building starting obviously right across the road. You can see they're starting to put the foundation in. One thing I can tell you with Wayland from our experience we've had in the last couple of months, once they get in there, they move. So right now there's a transition into the trailers, but everything IT is working on it. Again, team effort. And the last update I got was everybody was in sync. North Star Software, that's continuous. Sometime around May 2020, as you all know, the financials came out, generated by the North Star system last month. So we're basically on track. We do have several more months to go. We have updated the B&F committee on all our progress and gotten feedback from them. We might be a little over budget on a capital side as far as IT contracting to ensure that we get all the historical data and everything else that we need. But it is being monitored, and based upon everything else that the team is juggling, I believe it's fine. Simpson Group compensation, that's basically completed, hopefully next week. We'll have a sign off on it as we go through the budget review. I guess in the beginning it was $100,000. We did negotiate and get it down, and we used a lot of work ourselves, especially Michelle and myself and other members. The budget was $50,000. Right now it's in at $39,000. We might have a couple more thousand coming in. So there it is. There's a lot of spend there, but right now all tracking positive. Budget fiscal year 2020-21 on track, and I'll talk about that more in the next slides. Next slides. Okay, in keeping with moving along, this is our dashboard. Basically, the number of calls that come in, the work orders, the amount of spend that we track, and the team utilizes this to make sure that we're up to date. Bottom line here is all the calls that have come in. We track them. We have a level 1, level 2, level 3 for customer service. Level 1 is Michelle. Level 2 is Kobe along with Eddie and Nobi Violante. And level 3 is the GM. So far, it seems to be working very well. Next slide. Okay, so I figure with the budget process starting on Monday, this would be a good time to give a proposed overview of the budget, what basically is going to go on over the next couple of weeks, if not the next month and a half. So I listed here the dates. I'll go through it quickly for each part, but Josh will have them on the website, as long as I believe also sending out a communication. So just highlight, you all know the budget binders were distributed this year somewhere around December 19th. The Budget and Finance Committee actually in their meeting yesterday reviewing the controls report, we actually had a good discussion on the proposed budget, which will definitely help streamline next week. I liked it, and I hope we're able to do it again next year. Prepared based upon BNF and board guidance, utilizing a bottoms-up approach. Okay, so what you're going to see on this proposed draft working document budget, it's a bottoms-up approach. And that's the guidance, and that's what we came up with. Every department head was involved in their budgets and will be a part of the presentation to the BNF committee and the board over the next couple of weeks. January 7th to the 9th, BNF committee presentation is scheduled for those dates. There is a change. Josh issued it. We will be meeting in the conference room, Josh? Boardroom, whatever we call it, the boardroom conference room. So we're very excited about that. As you know, it's been out of commission the last couple of years. And we've done a lot of good work in there, and we're going to continue to get it up to where we believe. Board will conduct the work sessions on the budget January 15th to the 17th. The GM will publish recommended budget on January 24th. This is all in line with our scrolls. February 5th, board conducts hearing on recommended budget. February 11th, Treasurer and GM provide board with any final recommendations. Anywhere where you see a star, that denotes meetings for member comment also. So there's plenty of times for member comment. February 7th to the 14th, board provides GM with any motions to amend. GM will calculate any assessment impact. February 18th, board hears final comments on the budget. Board considers any motions to amend and votes to adopt final budget. Okay, again, that timeline is a couple weeks earlier than normal, but we believe we'll be on track for that. Next slide. Okay, as promised, I got a proposed overview. I'm big on reconciliations. That's if you can see any of our work binders or any presentations in the committees or anything like that. So let's do a reconciliation. Let's do this now before we get into the review process Monday. So if we look at the current budget, 2019-2020 approved, the overall was 986. If I highlight what you're going to see over the next week and watch all my department heads as well as BNF review, the amenities, if I take all the amenities together and take what it would cost on the assessment on what we're proposing, it's $26 on the assessment favorable to what happened last year. We will get into that over the next 2 weeks. We will drill down. You will have all the detail on how that happened. Okay? The departments came in favorable, $23 on the assessment. One thing I want to point out there is that the salaries, or at least the proposed salary increases, which I'm going to talk about next from the Simpson study, have not been allocated to the departments as of yet. At this point, I believe, and the team believes, is that we need to break that out to explain it and so that everybody can totally understand the effect of the Simpson study and what we're proposing for this year as far as salaries. Let's just dive into it. Market adjustment. Market adjustment comes out to about $7 on the assessment. That's basically where Simpson said that we needed to get to the minimum for basically every job position posted. So in order to get certain employees to the minimum, it would come out to $7 to get them there, as well as with the police. So it's somewhere around 56, 60,000. That will all be presented with detail. Next, mandated adjustment. Mandated adjustment is basically the minimum wage increase. We would have had this no matter what, and we're going to have it over the next couple of years as it phases in. $9. COLA, the COLA adjustments in there, recommended proposed at 2%. And you can see the effect there, $9. Merit pool, I'm asking for a 1.25% merit pool, which comes out to just rounded somewhere around $5. Now, keep in mind, and I think this is where I want to say it, in the 986, when we take a holiday or something as far as bulkheads and we don't include it or salary increases, when we come for the next budget, that's all an increase. It has to be covered. So even though we'll look at that and make a decision to cut something, the next year it has a big effect on it, okay? So let's go with there. So the subtotal for the salary adjustments is $30. So if you put that up there with the 23 for the departments and some of the others, you can see where we're at. Depreciation, $13. As you know, we've done a lot of construction. Obviously, depreciation will increase. In there also is we will receive less interest for the funds than we did last year because of the decrease in interest rates, if anybody follows that like I do. There's also an inflation factor in there that's calculated, okay? Medical inflation, $9. Even though we're going to the 80-20, right? And by that, what I mean is the employer, Ocean Pines, will pay 80% of the medical. Now the employees are paying 20, but we still have an increase in there, and that's in the budget. Bulkheads, $19, as I mentioned. Took a holiday from that last year. The board decided not to put that in the assessment. I've put that back in there. But when we talk about bulkheads and we do presentations, and Colby does a presentation next month, you're going to see that there is going to be an increase for bulkheads recommended, and that's probably going to be over the next couple of years. But we will get into that. There's detailed plans for that and explanations. Operating deficit recovery. Let's just take a moment on that. Last year, as you know, the board committed to funding the operating deficit that we had, which was the right thing. And in last year's budget, I believe it was somewhere around $30, $31 of our assessment went towards decreasing the operating deficit that we inherited. This year, I'm taking it out. The proposal is that we do not need it. I'm utilizing the budget variance favorability that we've been reporting each month. We're comfortable, confident that we will have at least the $250,000, which is what we had mandated to offset the operating deficit. So keep in mind, part of that assessment, we're paying off prior deficits. Okay, so the $30 is not needed because I will fund it, and we will show that. There'll be detailed reconciliations for everybody next week with the operating budget favorability. That brings us down to, and I want to note, this is a draft. This is a proposed working document, 978. All right, so even covering a lot of expenses that we didn't include last year, right now that's the number. Working document. Okay. Next page. All right, so this is one thing that's very important to us in finance as well as the team, and it should be to everybody, and it is. We have made this over the last year or two. Part of the presentation is our reserves. So again, high level here for today, but this will all be broken down. The detail will be explained, but you can see that we have put in, if you just look in the second column, the $1,968,000, that's basically the depreciation, the interest, what we're funding for replacement. Same thing with bulkheads, the roads, that number's familiar, 335. New capital, we were mandated by the board, and I'll explain in detail what that is over the next week. The expenditures, there's work plans for all of that. Like I said, Colby, Nobi, Eddie, they'll be presenting it next week. As far as the bulkheads, all detailed work plans. The roads, the new capital is all broken out, and the same thing with the replacement. If you look down at the bottom right corner, you're coming in about 4.7. You will also see that finance has calculated over the next 3, 4, 5 years what our expectations and forecast is for our reserves, so that we can see that we are in line and what it will take to get back to what Budget and Finance recommended a year ago of that 22 to 28% funding for our reserves. So we are tracking that. There is a big amount of oversight on that. Turn the page. Okay, so let's get into the controller's report for November. This was reviewed with BNF yesterday, and we received their input. Let's just highlight what I have been doing, or we've been doing the last couple of months, and it seems to be working, at least for now, is comparing our budget variance, right? Our actual versus budget for the month this year compared to last year, so that we can see where we're at. So you can see last year for the month of November, we had a budget variance favorable, 21.6 million, 21.6 thousand, I'm sorry. This year it's 35, it's basically 36 for favorability of 14,000 from last year. So what caused this? So if we look up at the revenues, For this year, we have had some decreases versus last year. But on the expense side overall, we are favorable, and that's across the board. It's Public Works, GM Office, admin. In the admin, it's mostly consulting fees, IT, which is mostly IT. But in general, it's across the boards. There are payroll savings throughout the departments, and a lot of it is the yacht club also, and some of the other amenities. Okay, so that's for the month. You can see we're still tracking favorable. Turn the page. So where are we 7 months in, year to date? You've heard some numbers. We actually have a forecast built into the work papers for the proposed budget for this week, and that will be reviewed also. So bottom line is here. Again, we see it that we are favorable to budget this year, second column, current year, approximately $587,000. And we know the next 5 months, we usually have a usage of cash and we don't have as much revenue coming in. So we are anticipating some change there, probably to the lower end. But you can see, you can get a comparison and see how much better we're doing this year compared to last year. And it's basically across the board. On the revenue side, yacht club, marina, beach park and beach club, some golf. On the expense side, IT costs, consulting decrease, some maintenance. The yacht club compared to last year, the general manager's office, across the board, there are expense savings. Okay, turn the page. All right, so let's break down the 447.6, right? You want some detail. So we start off on this page on the amenities. You can see, basically how much of that 447 is the yacht club. We're hearing all kinds of numbers. Here it is for you, for everybody. Again, this is increase, decrease. If you look at the second column for the year to date, that's budget, that's actual versus budget. And then the third column is versus prior year. All right, so just to look at the yacht club, the 175.3 for this year versus budget at this point in time, based over the 587.4 on the second page, you can actually see now what we've been hearing and what percentage or what part of that favorability is the yacht club. Let's go right down. Beach park and beach club, you see the numbers, marinas, golf ops, maintenance, there is some timing there, but not as favorable as the rest. Turns Grill, that's just amazing, but we are favorable. Racket sports, you can see it, aquatics, they do make money, but there's a little unfavorability. The bottom line there is for the amenities, rounded 273,000, favorable to budget this year. And out of that 273, 175 is the yacht club. All right, turn the page. All right, so on this one, if you scroll down to the bottom, again, I'm focused on this year. You can basically get an idea with the other numbers. You got the 272.8, which is the amenities. We all know that by now, be repeating it. The 175.3 is the yacht club, added to 272, but it's 587 favorable. So you can see the other departments. And again, it's basically expense savings, payroll savings. There is some timing. I'm not going to, it isn't. And like I said, we anticipate the 587 to be down. And we have a forecast for that. All right, so there it is. It gives you everything in perspective for this year versus budget, as well as what we did last year and where we are this year. And that's it.
Excuse me, John, two quick questions. Number one, for the membership, be advised that the review of the annual budget, by the Budget and Finance Committee on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday is open to the public. So if you're interested in seeing the detail and the discussion associated with that, please feel free to attend that meeting. And the second thing, I don't believe we have recorded those sessions in the past, and I don't believe we're planning to record those again this year. So
we are going to record.
You are going to record
yes.
this. Okay, so then let's make sure that for those who are interested, who can't make it to the meeting, that the video of that particular meeting will be online. So I encourage people to attend if they're so interested. All right, next item on the agenda. Thank you, John. Next item on the agenda is the Treasurer's Report. Larry?
Okay, we'll go right to our cash slide. Again, for November, our rate of return was about 2.4%. God said with the way interest rates are today, it's a pretty good return. As of November 30th, we had approximately $13.1 million in cash. Approximately $7.3 million was in CDARS, of course, our FDIC insured, and approximately $5.8 million in money market, earning about 2%. Again, that's our liquid cash so that we can pay our bills on the projects we have going on. Also, to make sure we have enough cash on hand for the remainder of the year. Next slide. I'm not going to run through all the numbers, but if you look at the 11/30/19 balances for the replacement reserve fund, we had about $6 million. Bulkheads, 2.5. Roads, 900,000, and the total is about $9.4 million. Slide is our forecast through the end of the year. Again, you can see we've listed all the anticipated spends on our projects. Any other expenditures from any of the other departments. The bottom line is we're looking at through the end of April of this year of 2020 having a reserve balance of 4.46 be after most of our payments for the projects are paid.
Thank you, Larry. Next item on the agenda is public comments. Those of you wishing to make public comments, please step forward, state your name and your address, and the floor is now open for public comments.
All right, my name is Ann Shockley. I live at 273 Windjammer Road, and I just wanted a brief comment to support the resolution M01 that Mr. Daly is presenting today, and hopefully you will all vote favorably for that.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, I'll close the floor for public comments. Move into the next item on the agenda. It would have to be capital requests for purchases. Capital purchase requests. Seeing none, we'll move into the next item on the agenda, which are CPI violations. None have been reported. So we'll move into the next item, unfinished business from our December meeting. The first item is the second reading of Resolution M01. Frank.
Okay. Each of the board members has a total package, but let me go through it. The motion is to accept the proposed changes to Resolution M01, the purpose and effect. These changes update Resolution M01 to reflect a streamlined process for the rapid enforcement and compliance of the Ocean Pines Declaration of Restrictions. The background attached is Resolution M01. The Bylaws and Resolutions Committee relayed their suggested changes after the first readings, and they are included and highlighted in red. The ARC has also reviewed these changes. Their recommendations have been incorporated and are in orange. Legal counsel has also reviewed these changes. Their comments are the base document. These changes provide a defined path for rapid enforcement and compliance to the existing Declaration of Restrictions.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Right.
Frank, please.
Okay, basically, we have, for lack of a better term, obliterated the old M01 and just reused, at the recommendation of the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee, the same M01 title, okay? But what this does is provide a fast, effective way to enforce our Declaration of Restrictions when we run into compliance issues that aren't voluntarily handled. And essentially, to give you the overview, it's a 30-day window from the day of violation to the day that the general manager is authorized to get a court order to force compliance. In the middle of that, based on input from both the legal counsel and Bylaws and Resolutions and Architectural Review Committee, nothing has basically changed. So when a violation comes to the attention of management, on basically what we call day one, the violator is notified. They have 30 days to either rectify that situation, get a variance, or show substantial progress toward completing it. If they don't meet that criteria, then the GM is authorized by the board to go get a court order to force compliance. Okay, so that's basically how the system is set up to work. Within this also, we've laid out the steps for the board expects the operations team to go through to create a situation where there is due process, because any violator, the way that things are set up, has two opportunities typically to go to the Architectural Review Committee to get a variance to show that it really isn't a violation, or to show that they have a plan for substantial completion. But we've eliminated the step-by-step that was in the old M01, and the reason for that is actually pretty simple. We've outlined what we want as a board, and we're not going to micromanage. We're giving the operating team to put in the procedures where they belong. And for the reporting, again, rather than say what we want, we've made it clear what we want reported to the board and let the operating team determine the format of that report to us. Basically it.
Other discussion? I have one quick, it's a minor point. In section, under section 5, section 5, the definitions, it talks about responsible party, and there was a note in the reviews that I think it might have been from you, Cami, about does that cover all the entities with regard to ownership and definition of lot ownership? Because I think you brought up the idea of if the property goes into foreclosure, can the definition of responsible party still be applied? And I don't know if we've got an answer from legal or from the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee. Was that, is that wording okay? In other words, responsible party will cover if the property goes into foreclosure. That's still the legal entity that can be charged with the violation.
Absolutely. The base document is from legal. And by the way, one thing I did leave out, also in the board packet are the comments from both the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee, and there were some changes recommended from ARC that were put in. All those changes have been really incorporated in the base document. So, who knows what the future holds, but we've covered all our bases in terms of talking with all the responsible parties inside the association, including our legal counsel, to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's to make sure that what we're doing is proper.
Other discussion?
I just say that as the liaison to the ARC committee, I know they've worked hard on this, and Frank has done a great job on this, and I definitely support passing this.
The comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion to accept the second reading of Resolution M01, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for your hard work on this, Frank.
You're most welcome.
Next item under unfinished business is the second reading of Resolution B01. Camilla?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask that we waive Robert's Rules of Order, and I would like to call upon Jim Trimmel, who has been working on this certainly for a longer time than I have, to give some explanation.
Any motion to waive Robert's Rules of Order temporarily? Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, consider Robert's Rules of Order eliminated for now. Jim? And please talk into the microphone. Thank you.
For the record, Jim Trumbull, One Annapolis Court, the chair of the Bylaws and Resolutions Advisory Committee. I really don't have any further comment. The intention of the amendment to the resolution is to give greater detail to how we amend resolutions, the process that is used. Over the last year or so, the committee's worked on this amendment to the resolution because we found some lack of understanding, lack of information about how to go about amending a resolution. And what you have before you is the result of that. And we feel that it accomplishes the purpose of giving better information on how to amend a resolution. That's no further comment on that.
Any questions for Mr. Trumbull? All right, discussion. Thank you, Jim. Discussion.
Reinstate Robert's Rules of Order?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I'd like to reinstate Robert's Rules of Order. Any questions? Consider Robert's Rules of Order reinstated. Additional discussion.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, there were no additional comments after the first reading of this motion. And just publicly, I'd like to thank Jim Trimmel for what he does with the Bylaws, Rules, and Regulations Committee. Believe it or not, this is a fun committee to serve on. And I really am enjoying my time there because I've learned a lot, and meetings are open for anybody who wants to come and join.
I have a special spot in my heart too. I chaired that committee several years ago, and it's very interesting. Other comments, Frank?
I would also like to just second what Cammie did, because I can tell you that from going through M01 and some other things, change to adhere to. And that committee has been extremely instrumental, as has ARC, in guiding some changes. And I think it just goes to show that when we listen to the committees and incorporate.
Okay. The clarification. Other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of accepting the second reading of Resolution B01, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. That's the end of unfinished business from our December meeting. We'll move into new business. First item under new business is the first reading of Resolution M06. Steve Tuttle.
Right. M06, the concise statement. Resolution M06 has been revised by our Ocean Pines Election Committee to clarify two primary concerns. One is to clarify what constitutes a validation of the election results, and the second is to allow the candidate forum moderator to ask candidates questions in a random order. Background. There has been a question raised as to when and how the election results are validated. The revisions address the question on page 7 by stating that the act of presenting the results will validate the results in accordance with the bylaws. You can see page 8. The reference to the seating of candidates has been removed from attachment C. So they removed the statement about questions, responses shall begin with the candidate seated in the first position. And that is being replaced with the sequence of selecting the order in which candidates address the questions is left to the discretion of the committee, provided that all candidates are asked the same questions. The idea behind that second part is really to allow greater flexibility on the part of the moderator to ask questions. When you do it in a set order all the time, it puts candidates in a very different position, because if you're the third or fourth or fifth candidate speaking, you end up saying, well, I agree with what so-and-so said or whatever. So this puts it in a random order where each candidate will have opportunity to be the first to address a question or add comments as other candidates share on those.
All right, so this motion's been made as a first reading for M01. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
I'd like to, if I could. First, I want to thank Steve Tuttle. He just tirelessly effort doing this election committee. It's hard to be on that committee because you don't get a lot of help, volunteer help, and it's hard to find people that want to volunteer to be on this board. I appreciate it so much, all the work he puts into it. Secondly, I would I want to thank him for the random questions. I think is a great idea. That's what they do at the park. I think it worked out great for me last year. Don't get me wrong. Being number one was perfect. I got to answer them first and have my last statement last. The only thing I would say is the only part of this that I have a little problem with is the seating of the candidates at the forum, which is up to your discretion, which I have no problem with it being up to your discretion, but I still think it should be seated 1 through 8 or 1 through 6 or whatever, just for continuity of the ballots when people are sitting out there watching. You could do random questions all day. That doesn't make any difference because that's a great idea. But I think the seating should be 1 through whatever based on the ballot, just because it just the people that are sitting out there, it's easy for them to recognize who it is by the number or by the name. That's just my only comment. But thank you again, Steve. You do a great job. Really appreciate it.
But
I second what Tom is saying about the seating order. I think that but I also would say that the replacement statement, I would prefer that it reads that the committee uses a randomization procedure for the order of asking the questions rather than having it state that it's left to the discretion of the committee. I think there needs to be a randomization procedure. Whatever you use, if it's pulling them out of a hat or something, rather than just saying that it's left discretion.
yeah, let me also make a comment. I think, Tom, if I would offer, I think you were making those comments to Steve Habiger, not Steve Tuttle.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah, because Steve Habiger has been the chair of the Elections Committee. I want to publicly recognize all the work he has done for that committee over the past couple of years.
Steve does great work.
And Steve does too. So,
I got to change the first name.
I don't know if it's appropriate to put it here, but my comment here is I'm all for this. it's come up, and we've asked this question in the past, and we haven't had a sort of, an answer that we can all hang our hats on. And that is, when does a director officially become a director? All right. So the results of the election happen on said day. All right. The ballots are counted. We know based on that. And then there's a time lapse between the final counting of the ballots and what we now have defined as validation. So the question would be, when does that individual become a director? And we've asked council, and I think we need to go to the council again, because we've had opinions, but I want to be able to hang our hat on something that says, at this point in time, said individual, based on the results of the election, becomes a director and assumes the responsibilities of that position. So does anybody else have any thoughts on that? Because I think it's still, in my personally, it's a little ambiguous right now, because one of the things that we did was allow for in the election process, and I may have to reserve or rescind Robert's Rules of Order in a second, but there was a opportunity in our bylaws to ask for a recount. Right? And that's why when we talked about the definition of allowing the results to be announced prior to the annual meeting, there was that gap in there. Should there be any issue, there's an opportunity for a candidate to request a recount and go through the documented process in our bylaws to allow for a recount. So my question then comes back to, I think we really need to go and do our homework again and I'll take partial responsibility for this, is that get to legal and say, guys, we need an absolute definition of when a candidate becomes a director in between the time the election results are announced and the time they're validated at the annual meeting.
Mr. Chair, we have spent considerable amount of time on this in the Bylaws, Rules, and Regulations Committee in defining what the word validation means. And in validation, we are looking to publish the results of the election and this is the definition we've made of validation, is when they're actually published to the community that needs to have them. And that's a validation. And I think it was our thought that once the results of the election are validated, that the person becomes a director. I see Mr. Trimmel standing in the back.
I want to rescind Robert's Rules of Order.
Yes.
All right. Consider rescinded. Jim, please. And as Jim comes up, one of the other things I struggled with is the word validation. Does validation mean acceptance or authorization? Those are two. And I believe, based on the language, it's acceptance, because you can't infer that the board at that time has any authorization to do anything else other than accept the results of the election. I think that's worthy definition. But I'm sorry, Jim, please.
Yeah, no, Mr. President, when we were in our meeting, I Googled the word validation and we all took a stab at it. And I think that you're correct in your assumption of what the validation is. It's acceptance of what the information as it has been published to the public.
I was just going to address the issue of when a director becomes a director, if I can put it that way. That's been considered before. And I can try to dig up some information. It's at least been considered publicly by the prior consul, Mr. Joe Moore. And once the validation is accomplished, that elected person becomes a director. Well, let's talk about the meeting. Steve comes forth, a quorum exists. Steve comes forth, presents the election results. The individuals who were elected are at that time become directors. I think that's clearly established. I'll dig up the information I think that supports that. But there is no gap, for example, from the annual meeting to the organization meeting in which we're in limbo as to who's the director.
Hold on,
I'm sorry.
Jim, I want to say, so Jim, if I am hearing you correctly, then the 2 minutes after the election results are counted.
Validated.
Counted, okay? Because there's a gap between the time they're counted and the time they're validated. And that's the area of concern for me. Okay. So based on what I believe I heard you say, those individuals are not yet directors. They won't become directors until the validation. And that's what I want to make very clear.
At the annual meeting or with no quorum. That's right.
If the election results are announced on Thursday night and the annual meeting is Saturday, you've got roughly 24, 36 hours where those original individuals are still board members, okay, until Saturday, the annual meeting, and the validation.
That's
Okay, I just wanted to be, because there were so many interpretations of that I think it warrants us discussing it in public. Larry, you were next.
Yeah, and this, and my comments go back to this whole process of making the announcements publicly of what the results are prior to the annual meeting. And exactly what Doug said, if the results are counted and if there is a demand for a recount, or if there is a problem, if someone raises a concern or files a complaint that there is a problem with the voting process or the count process, way we are today, which has changed just a couple years ago, is that the results are announced. I wasn't in favor of that then, and I'm still not in favor of it. I think results should be announced at the annual meeting, mainly to avoid an issue where we announce results at the day they're counted, and if by chance someone files a complaint or contests the election. Because now what you've done, you've announced to the public that these are the directors and all we're waiting for is the annual meeting for validation. And in my mind, this is an unintended consequence of the actions taken a few years ago to satisfy some people who wanted to know exactly what the results were the day they were counted.
I
Colette,
don't want to comment on that.
Jim,
we're
comment?
a completely different story. I don't want to comment on that issue. I'm just going to say that once the validation is accomplished, they are the directors, but not until then.
All right, very good.
Question.
Colette, and then Steve, I'll invite you up.
Okay, I have two comments. One is in response to Larry's comment, is that if it's clear that a director is not a director until the validation process, that still gives us that period of time to address any concerns or questions about the validity of the results. Secondly, not to belabor what validation means, but to say that it is the acceptance says that there's an affirmative action that the board must take that is optional. You could either accept or not accept. Say that you receive the results is a passive process that has to happen. There's no option as to the receipt. I think we really need to think in terms of the validation process involves the chair of the elections committee presenting for us to receive those results, not for us to say, yes, we accept, or maybe not. Just, I think language matters.
It goes back to the difference between acceptance and authorization.
Right.
So and in our bylaws, there is no language that infers or states that we are authorized to make a decision, an actionable item. We're basically taking acceptance of the results of the election, and that's all we're authorized to do.
Of the results of the
Steve, you had a comment, please.
Yes, sir. Several. Thank you. Good morning. Kind of trying to do this in reverse order, I guess. For the 3 years that I've been involved in the elections committee, we have been very careful to say, when we count the ballots, this is the ballot count. And at the annual meeting, say, the following people have been elected. And that's to allow that break that you're seeing correctly between the votes being counted and the validation of the election. So we've been very careful with our wording about that for now 3 years. If I could, and kind of in reverse order, some of the comments, the randomization or not of questions is couched the way it is so that we can have a situation where if there are 2 openings and 2 candidates, which is, we agree is unlikely, but it's possible, that randomization would be kind of a weird thing to do. And hence, leaving it up to the committee was felt to be the better approach to that. Mr. Janusek, in your point about seating in ballot order, I would point out that what we did was we didn't delete the requirement that they be seated in ballot order. We simply moved it into the more appropriate location. It was on page 11. You'll note it was deleted up in paragraph sub 3 and then moved down under candidate seating. I would also like to let you know that we are working on, a new ballot system. It's caused by the introduction of the North Star system and not having any more consultants out there. And we are working towards a situation which would allow us to put photographs of the candidates on the ballot in addition to their name. So that would allow us to further improve the ability of the electorate to remember which person said what and which person are they in favor of. So we're always conscious of ballot order because it is random. We want to make sure that the electorate is able to track which candidate is which. So we'll certainly continue to do that.
If I could, I know you.
Sir.
Tom and then Frank.
If I could, I know you moved it. I'm reading it directly from the new one, but you changed it to seating of candidates in the forum will be assigned by committee and may vary if multiple forums are conducted. That's all I saw. And that's seating of candidates, not questions of candidates. In 4B now instead of 3B. It says it may be assigned by committee, may vary if multiple forums are conducted.
Okay, we'll take that under advisement.
I mean, you can do it any way you want. It doesn't, but my preferred opinion would be to have the seating in order of 1 through 6, 1 through 8, or what have you, just to keep the continuity of the candidates.
I get your point.
Not necessarily the questions, because I really believe they should be random, but I think the seating, just to keep that, would be a good idea.
Yes, sir.
Frank.
Basically, just 2 questions in 2 different cases. So let's have case 1 where you have a candidate that asks for a recount. Is there sufficient time between the receiving of the ballots, the counting of the ballots, and the annual meeting to do that, in your opinion, as the committee chair?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Second question, which is a little bit more theoretical, but given some of the situations in the past, I'm not sure it's not that big of an outlier. What happens if we get a legal challenge? Because if we get recounting is one thing, a legal challenge is another, where in essence, you have a board seated and possibly somebody on that board to be replaced, but not defined legally to be replaced. How does that situation come out?
Yeah,
And I think that's where I was going, Frank, that if you remember a couple years ago, a candidate publicly stated that if he was not elected, he would be challenging it legally. And I would suspect they would quickly go to the courts and file a motion to prevent us from validating it or changing the board at that point. There'd be it could create a lot of problem. And then, and again, this goes back to my point of if something like that were to happen, and maybe I doubt, but you never know, that here we are announcing those results and something like that pops. Now it creates a real problem.
Yeah. My comment, we're always running that risk, regardless of what language we put in place. Regardless of whether we announce it the day of, the day after, so on and so forth, there's always the possibility of a legal challenge and interpretation of the results, and then a question regarding those results. I think, common sense would prevail. Obviously, we'd want a legal advice on this and legal opinion, but the idea would be you couldn't wait for if a case was filed, you couldn't wait for it to get filed, to get scheduled in court, have a hearing, and so on and so forth, and conduct business in a regular way. I think the idea would be general consensus would be to have someone that was elected, all right, and validated, sit in, and then let the legal process take its place. So, but I think that's all theoretical, and quite frankly, since we don't have an answer right now, I would say that that's probably something we should pursue but I think it's independent of M06. All right, I think it's an independent issue that we should talk about, but I don't think it should get in the way of the recommended changes in this first reading of M06.
Mr. Chair.
Other discussion?
Just one last comment. I think you're absolutely right that we do need that, but I think that one of the best places for us to start is to put in place some sort of policy and procedure that would have a blessing of our legal counsel, but also enable us to enact whatever we need to do as a board to attempt to resolve this locally with the person who is aggrieved by the procedure before we involve ourselves in lawsuits to see if there's anything that we can do. I mean, I see this with various boards of education that I work with, and I think that having a process in place where the grievance begins, if there is an unfavorable outcome, is in our best interest.
And Larry, before I get to you, Cami, as the liaison to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee, I'd ask if you could pursue that with Mr. Trummel as an initial step to see if there's some things that we can at least put in as far as a framework to go that would act as the basis for us going and invoking advice from legal counsel and take it in that step. So if you don't mind, if you take that under advisement.
Certainly.
Thank you. Larry?
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's good next steps. I just wanted to point out that while if there is a challenge and someone does go to court and they get a temporary restraining order, we have no, to prevent the placement of new board members, there's nothing we can do. The existing board would have to continue, or maybe not because the board members' time period is up. So all of those issues, while far-fetched, may not be so far-fetched with some situations we've had before.
Yeah, point taken, and that's what we would present to legal for their advice on that. Other discussions regarding M06? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor of accepting the first reading of M06, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, consider it recorded as the first reading of M06, and we will potentially have that on our agenda for the February meeting. The next item under new business, a motion to accept the Architectural Review Committee revised guidelines. Steve Tuttle.
Great. I move that the Ocean Pines Board of Directors accept the revised architectural guidelines as presented by the ARC Advisory Committee dated January 2020. Purpose of the motion is to allow the Board of Directors to accept the revised guidelines. The current ARC guidelines are dated August 2006 and were revised by in February 10, 2010. The ARC Committee has worked over the past year to update and revise the guidelines. The effort has been to clarify areas where there has been confusion and to provide a document that assists all residents of Ocean Pines in understanding and utilizing the ARC guidelines. ARC guidelines dated January 2020 will benefit our residents, the CPI department, and the ARC Committee in carrying out the responsibilities assigned to that committee.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Tom, go ahead. You were finished first.
All right, I've gone through all of these, and I've gone through the old ARC, and I have some problems with the new guidelines. I have specific ones. The fire pit guideline, there's no, I went through the whole thing, and it's just, I know it's just minutia, but there's no way of appealing this there's different size lots all through Ocean Pines. Mine, for instance, is 50 feet wide with a 25-foot piece with a house on it. So I have 7.5 feet on one side. There's no place for me to put a fire pit if I want to put it next to my house. There's people that are on the bulkhead lots that have 16 feet back to their bulkhead from their deck. They can't put it on their deck. They can't put it in the yard. There should be on a case-by-case basis with this. I'm sorry, it's in there. It's just black and white. There's no fire pits allowed for this, no fire pits allowed for this. It just seems to me to be way too restrictive. And plus, I'm not sure how you're going to police it, to be totally honest with you. There's so many fire pits in Ocean Pines right now. There's no way you're going to keep up with them. My next problem is with the fence. The fencing, we've all had issues with fencing in Ocean Pines for the last 30 years. And this is getting more and more restrictive with the new guidelines in it. And I think, again, that should be on a case-by-case basis. I know it's tedious to do it, but I just don't agree with it in some situations. There's been people that have been before this board for the last 12 years, 13 years. I've been in the audience with them that have had their fence, had issues with their fence, but Ocean Pines couldn't do anything. So I don't like the guidelines. I'd be happy to sit on the committee and talk about how we could revise them. My third is trailers. The trailers and RVs and things. Ocean Pines is a completely different community than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You got families that run their own business, things that, with whatever they may be. I don't want to see commercial trailers on every driveway in Ocean Pines, but I think there are circumstances where someone, a construction person, for instance, or a LuLaRoe dealer or anybody that might be working the next day might have their trailer in their driveway and don't need to get a CPI violation notice in their mail. There's just, they shouldn't be there for the whole weekend because obviously that's a different story. But I just think these are too restrictive. And for me, I'm not going to vote for it, to be honest with you. So.
Yes. As the liaison to the bylaws committee, I would offer on their behalf and also on my own behalf that I think that we have a duty to notify the citizenry, the people who are residents of Ocean Pines, of what these intended things are. I know that this is my first reading of them when I received my board packet yesterday. And I would like to have some time to digest, take this just to digest, and I'm sure that a number of our residents would. I had a particular problem with the whole thing about signs. I know that our chairman said that he had had signs removed from his home and that wasn't going to happen to him again. But there has been some confusion. There was some mention of the fact that no signs are allowed in Ocean Pines. If you go back to the results or to the minutes of a board meeting that was conducted in May 2014, that signs are allowed on private property. There's a difference between our public elections and the internal controls that we do on these directors' elections. But I think that really totally needs to be clarified, especially in view of the fact that we have what may be a contentious presidential election coming forward. And I'd like to see that we agree or that it is consistent, but we certainly can't stifle or put a chill on someone's First Amendment rights to say you will not have a political sign in your yard. So for that reason, I would not be able to vote for this. Although I do appreciate, Steve, all the work that you guys have done on this. This is a labor of love and much appreciated. But at this point in time, I don't think it's ready to go.
Other discussion? Colette.
Yeah, the comment that I would make has to do with the precision of the language again. I like the fact that there's a glossary that defines terms at the end of the document, but I think for clarity's sake, those terms should be defined in the sections in which they come up or in which they apply. And then I think there also needs to be greater consistency in the use of terminology. There are times when you refer to OPA, other times it's referred to as the association. There are times when it's referred to as a committee, other times it's the ARC, and I think that creates confusion. Also, I think we need a definition of political signs versus OPA candidate signs. I think that creates a lot of confusion. And we have had challenges to the vehicle section. And I think there needs to be greater clarity in the definitions of the terms within that section, not just at the end in the glossary. But again, I thank you. This is a real complicated document. You guys have done a great job on it. I think there's a little proofreading that's needed as well. There are places where there are redundancies, something stated earlier in a section restated later. But again, thank you for your work.
Other discussion? Frank?
More of a question. I mean, just from the work that I've done on enforcing the declarations, these things are extremely, extremely complicated. Should legal counsel review this? I mean, because there are two aspects of it. One is, this is what we're saying, and because we're dealing with architecture, I'll simplify it. This is what we're saying. We want something to look like and be built like and function in a community. And then, as Colette says, there's the wording. And I can tell you just from my experience in going through and changing and working with bylaws and resolutions and legal counsel, the way that I would say it as a layman, not a trained attorney, and the way that you would say it to fit with our bylaws and resolutions and in a legal sense, it's an entirely different document. Okay? It says the same thing and means the same thing, and it's not critical of the work. It just has to be different to hold up if it's challenged. So I pose it more as a question, and that is, should it be reviewed for the board and for the committee to consider?
Comment? Steve?
Let me make a few comments. As far as the signs, one of the things you have to keep in mind that political signs are a freedom of speech issue, and we cannot restrict those in the same way we can OPA election signs. So we do have very clear definition about OPA election signs. The other signs, it's a lot more difficult to put restrictions on. As far as fire pits, I think they did a pretty good job in defining what those are. And I just want to say to the board, and me afterwards, all of these documents were submitted to you well over a month ago for comment and to respond to me about them. And I can verify it by emails if you want me to. So I'm a little frustrated that no one has sent me a single question about any of these documents. And now we have these questions coming up. We could have addressed them sooner, perhaps dealt with them. I did ask Doug about sending it to legal, and we decided at that point that we didn't think it was necessary. ARC is an independent committee. It's not controlled by the board. And I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Other discussion? Right. I have a comment. So, I think the intent here is to identify the fact that the current ARC guidelines are somewhat dated. Over the years, we've run into situations where we're not sure exactly how to take the current language and apply it to the situation that we've encountered. So the attempt is obviously to try to upgrade that and make sure that not only we address those issues, but we also stay within the confines of the law, Maryland state law and all the other applicable governance. This is a first reading. And if you think about the process we've had in the past and what we'll continue to have it's just that. It's a first reading. It's meant to bring these issues to the forefront, discuss them publicly, share our opinions on them, and decide that, whether or not we need to make additional changes before we decide to move forward with a second reading and ultimately an approval. Now, let's bear in mind, too, that there's no requirement for us, if it goes to a second reading, to approve the second reading. It's just like any other motion. We can certainly agree that we've had our discussions, and we can agree that it's not ready to move forward yet, and we can do whatever remediation we need to do at the time. So I think this falls into that case. And Steve's correct. He and I chatted about this, and I said, well, let's not incur the legal costs just yet. Let's discuss it amongst ourselves, get the different approaches, the different viewpoints on it, and decide whether or not it's worthwhile to take forward. There's anything there that has come up. Obviously, this discussion has borne out the fact that there are a couple of issues that probably need a little more refinement, a little more clarity. And so I think the process is doing exactly what it needs to do, and that is get our opinions before we incur costs of legal. I would offer that is to be consistent with our process. Unfortunately, the chairman of the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee is here. Maybe we refer back for their initial review so that they can look at it and say, before we incur the cost for legal fees, that, let's make sure we covered all our bases. You've heard the discussions, at the board level. So go back, take a look at that, incorporate anything you think needs to be incorporated before we take it to legal. And then maybe we should consider taking it to legal, sharing our opinions and so on and so forth. Maybe we should write a summary, and I certainly will be more than happy to volunteer. Camby, perhaps you and I could put together a summary that would be, preface to presenting the information to council so that they can look at it and give us some advice. So we're spending our money wisely. So it's just a thought. I know, Tom, any other questions? Tom?
Quick point of order. There's nowhere in here that it says first reading. This is a motion to accept the architectural review guidelines as written and updated by Steve Tuttle. So it's not in here as first reading anywhere, which is why, and I apologize for not getting back to you soon enough on this. It's my fault for not reading into it more than I should have, and I should have emailed you. But it's a huge, long document with a lot of intricacies that you all put a lot of time into, and I appreciate it, don't get me wrong, but this is the first opportunity I've had without emailing you directly to say anything. But if it was first reading, this is exactly how it should be done, with public comment or our comment to the public, and then go to second reading. So I don't know how you can change that if you want, or what you need to do. But
so, Tom, first of all, thank you very much for the clarification. If you would look at the screen over here, it says first reading, Resolution M01. So my apologies for looking over there and saying it's first reading. Tom, you're absolutely correct. It is a motion to accept, and certainly at this point in time, we can treat it as such. So I stand corrected, and I thank you for that. I was reading off a bad script, I guess, huh? But yeah, point well taken. This is a motion, so strike my comment regarding first reading, and let's continue the discussion under the premise that it is a motion to to accept the guidelines for ARC. Frank?
Well, Tom just addressed the first point because it wasn't a first reading, it's a motion, okay? The second point, if we've discussed, I mean, if you've discussed and felt, you know, we would, at this point in time, not send it to Jeremy because, I mean, you know, this is a lot of time, which is going to be a lot of money. But if we go the first reading route and it goes through the committees again, and I assume that ARC's not going to have a problem because they generated it, and it's a lot of good work. And if it goes through bylaws and resolutions and they're okay with it not going to council, then I'm okay with the discussion. But if the committees come back and suggest that it goes to council, then I think we have to consider sending it to council. Because the truth of the matter is, if you just look at just the items that we've discussed, fire pits, we've had one contentious situation, okay, past 2 years. Right now, we're dealing with a situation that deals with trailers and somebody telling us basically, when the Maryland Court of Appeals tells me to move it, I'll move it. So I can think that let's take people at face value that will face legal challenges to these documents.
Very well.
Other discussion? Larry, and then Colette.
Yeah, I think let's remember that, as Steve said, you know, the ARC committee does not report. They can make their decisions, and regardless of what we say. So because of that, I think it's critical that it does go to council, because what we're seeing is as we try to enforce these regulations, we're getting challenged by different people. And I think right up front, you know, if we're going to make these changes, they need to be reviewed by council. I know it'll cost us money, but it's going to have to be reviewed sooner or later.
Colette?
I agree that it should go to council. Council is going to look at it with a different eye, I believe, than the bylaws and they will look at it from the point of view of having to defend it. If it goes to a legal challenge, I think it is worth them. Go ahead and go through the process.
Other discussion?
Is there, can we possibly table it for this meeting and review it, maybe send it to the guidelines committee and have them review it first and see if there's enough issues to send it to council? But because I don't have a problem with sending it to council, but there's so much in here, the cost is going to be amazing to have them just review this and mark it all up. And we could go on a case-by-case basis. How many cases has anybody come up with against our rulings for CPI in the last 2 years? One for a fire pit and one for a trailer. You know, if it's only a couple, then let them go on a case-by-case basis to the attorney and have them look through our guidelines and fix them that way. I mean, I don't have a problem with bylaws committee looking at it to see if there's some things that they might want to tweak, and that's a cost-free approach. To send this whole document to our counsel, legal counsel, and have him put frickin' 12 hours into it or whatever it's going to take to make it a legal document, I think is just a little overkill, to be totally honest with you.
So let me respond to that real quick. So, all right, go ahead, Cam. I'll respond.
I would urge us to take the approach that I think that we can streamline some of those hours that's spent by our council if we do take the approach of going back to the bylaws committee. And I am more than willing to meet with you and to meet with Jim and maybe even see if we can get a special meeting of the bylaws committee together, only to start a preliminary fix. And Steve, I want to apologize to you. I did not mean that I hadn't seen these ever before. It was yesterday in our meeting that the thing about the signs was brought up that I was asked to bring to the table. So I apologize for that misunderstanding and hope you appreciate my feelings about the good work that you do. So that would be my feeling, that we break this down and maybe avoid a lot of hours of legal cost. By giving it at least a running start and then take a final, more polished product to legal for their opinion and the defensibility of the document that we decide to adopt.
The comments. Colette?
Yeah, I would just disagree with the concept of having us fix this on a case-by-case basis. Because if we do that, we're going to lose cases. Those cases are going to be precedent-setting, and then we're going to have a bigger problem. I think we need to get the language straight up front, do it right. May not need to be a review of the whole thing, but certainly those areas where bylaws and resolutions feel that we need to have more of a...
Steve?
I don't know if, I don't know if Ann would like to say anything as a member of the committee.
Well,
Yeah,
You can waive Roberts
I'd
again.
like to waive Robert's Rules of Order. Any
So
questions?
moved.
Okay, consider Robert's Rules of Orders waived. Ann, thank you.
you all have some valid points. This has been a document in work for over a year now. Basically, what we are trying to do is we are trying to refine some of the regulations that now. We did not come up with a total new document. You all know that these guidelines are part of Ocean Pines. You get one when you settle a house in Ocean Pines. What we are seeing in our committee is people that, okay, sheds, for instance, you go by the square footage of the base. So it's 110 by 12 is what's allowed. It's 120. We have people building 2-story sheds because there's no height. So we're trying to build that in. Basically, we're looking at people, and Mr. Janicek, you said, well, what do they do? You know, if this doesn't fit your, such as the fire, if it doesn't fit, that's when you come for a variance. If you look at the guidelines and that does not fit your situation, or you want something different, or you want it amended, that's what the procedure is, to come before us and say, this is what I want. I want to build my house 40 feet high and not 35 feet high. I want to build a fence closer than 10 feet from my rear line. All those things. And then we go on a case-by-case basis and we look at that. What good reasoning do you have? Now, people will come in and say, well, the precedent is, there is no precedent with our committee. We go on a case-by-case basis. Yes, we think about things that happened in the past and certain arguments that people had for what they want. And that is one of our thoughts is it something you want, or is it something you really need? And sometimes we say, okay, you can put this fence up because we can see that the reasoning for it, but when the property sells, it will be taken down. So that we do a lot of adjustments. We do field trips. We go to people's houses because we cannot clearly see what they, even with pictures, clearly see what they are trying to present to us in their argument. So we have gone to their houses to see what they're saying and think, oh, yes, this makes sense. Or, oh, no, this really is not a valid argument. We will table it, ask them to come back. We have a situation right now where someone is wanting to build a shed. Basically, it's a glorified garage. Seriously, it's that big. And with no building permits whatsoever. And so we are saying, we tabled it. We didn't just say no. We tabled it and said, come back with a better solution for what you want to do. So we have put a lot of work in it. You all have a very good idea of going to legal. I can see that. I would suggest going to the legal that works with CPI and not to Jeremy, because they have a better grasp of the past history. They've worked with this and what they're dealing with. Jeremy, although I'm sure he's a very good attorney, may not have that expertise as our local guy. So it's just, that's what we're trying to do. The fire pits, JB, prior GM, brought that up. And so we thought, all right, maybe we need to address it. We did consult the fire chief here in Ocean Pines before that was written and his expertise. So we don't just make up stuff. And all of this is basically, premised on the guidelines that were already in place. So I don't know if that helps you all a little bit.
Thank you for your. It's a thankless job.
It is, and as
Really
Steve
is, and I
says, we are
understand.
unique in that people say, well, where can I go? Well, you can do what you want. So they can appeal to the board, but basically we are the only committee where our decision stands. But as I say, we bend over backwards to try to do the best we can to allow the person to do what they want within reason, but also think of what do we want Ocean Pines to look up as a whole? What kind of community do we want? A trailer, a house trailer 35 feet long in everybody's driveway? No, not really. So, we have to think of these things too. So thank you.
I'd like to reinstate Robert's Rules of Order. They're reinstated. Frank?
Just a comment. I mean, going through the parallel process that I just went through with M01, the Architectural Review Committee has a very tough task. I mean, 22 different sets of declarations of restrictions that they're trying to enforce. And I feel, as a board member, 100% confident in them. If they've put a year's worth of work in it, I think it's going to be I have confidence that it's going to be very high quality work. I know that when we sent M01 to Jim's group for the bylaws and resolutions, and they looked at it, they did I'm highly confident in their work and what they do in reviewing it, and they suggested sending it to the legal counsel. I would suggest we follow the same process here with this. Go to a first reading. Okay, ARC has done their work. Go to bylaws and resolutions. Let them take a look at it. If they recommend to the board that this goes to legal counsel, then I think it goes to legal counsel, in my opinion. Because, you know, I mean, I get as frustrated as anybody up here on legal expense. But the fact of the matter is, we're in a society where litigation is often considered the first resort if you don't like the answer that you hear. And we have to protect us, and we have to protect our homeowners from that situation. And unfortunately, with the expense, it comes with the turf to spend the money.
Well said.
Other comments? All right, I have one. So from a parliamentary procedure perspective, it's not a first reading because we're not making a change to a resolution. We're actually making a change to accepting a document. We could table the motion, which I believe, and I forgive me for not knowing the parliamentary procedure to the nth degree. I don't know if that automatically places it as unfinished business on the next agenda, or a table just defers it to later on in the current meeting. I think there's a question regarding how tabling a motion is handled. We could defeat the motion and then ask that it be reconsidered for an upcoming meeting based on the discussion we've had today regarding presentation to the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee. Came in, we can run a summary of that and as a preparation for presentation to legal counsel, and then take it to legal counsel and then present it back to Steve for a subsequent reintroduction of the motion at a subsequent meeting. So I'm not really sure. My preference is it's a little bit cleaner because we don't know how long the process is going to take to maybe defeat the motion and then ask that it be gone through the process we've discussed today with the intent of reintroducing it at a subsequent meeting. So
we ask Steve to withdraw the motion.
We ask Steve to withdraw the motion as well.
That's the other option.
That's one of the other options. So, all right, then Frank.
Could we ask Steve to accept a friendly amendment to change this motion to a first reading?
I think a first reading is not applicable since it's not a resolution. All right, it is, you're accepting a guideline document. It's be much like accepting, some policy document. So. Steve, again, I hope I'm not violating any parliamentary procedure, but there's an option here. If you're willing, you can withdraw the motion, and if not, then we can vote on it as we see fit, and then based on the results of that, we can take the appropriate actions as a follow-up. So,
possible to amend the motion to ask that we submit it to bylaws, and depending on bylaws recommendation, we submit it to our local. And my motion that way. So we keep this thing on track. I don't really want to table it or take it off because the committee spent a year already working on it, and I'd like to see us make progress.
You think this through. So the amendment to the motion would be to submit the document for review by the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee and subsequent review by legal counsel for presentation for acceptance at the next board meeting. Would that be an appropriate way to say it?
Yeah.
Future board meeting.
At a future. I wouldn't say next because I don't know how long it'll take.
Can we word that properly that everybody's comfortable with it?
Fine. Just get rid of accept the revised guidelines and put in there to present it for review by the Bylaws Committee, and then from there review by council to go again after.
Our secretary has to write this down. Frank, you have one more comment and let's move on.
The only comment that I was going to make is, I saw Jim's reaction, and maybe we should suspend Robert's rules and ask, since we just went through a different process on how to change a resolution, on what would be the proper way to handle this from a protocol standpoint.
All right, let's see. I think this is a record for our parliamentary process. I will ask that we suspend Robert's Rules of Order one more time and ask Jim to provide some advice from his perspective. Thank you, Jim.
I want to keep the mic back there, Jim.
Saturday morning golf.
Just real quick comment. Maryland starts at noon. Just saying. So.
Quite frankly, I'm not quite sure what to say. I'm very reluctant that the Bylaws and Resolutions Committee get involved in the ARC guidelines in any detail. Because we're not, we don't have any expertise in guidelines. So I'm really very reluctant. Yesterday we got involved in the guidelines on one specific provision, and that happened to be the political signs or political candidate signs. And that may even have gotten bypassed if I personally hadn't had a long history here. And when I say long history, reference has been made to a May 24th, 2014 meeting. I was physically present at that meeting. And if I hadn't been there, and if I hadn't had some interest in the issue, if there's somebody else that had been the chairman or I had not been on the committee, might not have been a thing said about it in our meeting. So, the Bylaws and Resolutions Advisory Committee is not an ARC guidelines expertise. That's the ARC guidelines. That's the ARC committee is where that belongs.
Jim, one thing I would offer for consideration would be, from a Bylaws and Resolutions Committee perspective, would it be prudent for you to review just to make sure that any statements in the guidelines submitted by ARC are in any violation or conflict with existing bylaws or DRs? Would that be an appropriate way for, because it sounds like already that, based on your personal experience with the political signs, there may be situations, but if you feel that, based on a review or based on what you've heard, we don't need to do that. We can certainly pass that that requirement along to legal. Then we'll certainly take that as your advice.
Again, Doug, I'm not really sure.
Okay, all right.
Does it make sense to go to legal with a review of the guidelines? Yeah, sure. But that.
Okay, so noted.
I'd rather not have the committee look at these guidelines.
So noted.
Really?
So noted. And based on your experience and advice, that's certainly, absolutely, we'll take that approach. I think, and thank you. And I think that maybe one of the things we could do to help ourselves would be to summarize, the areas that we want legal to focus on, rather than legal having to go through starting on chapter 1, verse 1, and go all the way through the document, at a billable rate, when maybe we can do ourselves a favor and basically say, these are the primary areas of focus we'd like you to look at. Maybe that's the best way to sort of manage the expenses in a prudent fashion. So, other comments, Larry?
I would again ask that, Steve, you just withdraw the motion based on the discussions we've had here, because it appears there's more.
Consider Robert's Rules of Order reinstated. Other comments, Steve?
Yeah, I really don't want to withdraw the motion because I feel like working on this well over a year, and it's not been secret knowledge. It's been out there, what they're working on. Appreciate Jim's institutional knowledge that we certainly don't have, some of us. What I would suggest is that we amend my motion then to ask the board members to take the next 2 weeks to get any comments, concerns you have, and at the end of 2 weeks, we compile those and then we submit it to our local attorney for their legal opinion. And at the end of that point, we bring it back for board approval or acceptance.
I can live with that.
I want to make sure, and I agree in concept with that. I want to make sure we state it properly as a motion. So we're going to have a motion to amend, a friendly amendment to your motion, Steve. And the friendly amendment should say that we are, asking the board
input.
Yeah, requiring the board to review the document, prepare information that can be summarized in a document that will be presented to local council.
You expecting me to get this?
It's on record.
Let me get my typing.
That's the part about friendly amendments. I see Michelle right there. Because I want to make sure, again, all kidding aside, we've got to get the friendly amendment worded properly. We have to second the friendly amendment, discuss it. So we have to make sure that we don't, overlook parliamentary procedure. So, Steve, and I'm paraphrasing here, but maybe we can come up to some agreement that the board is instructed to motion to have the board review the current ARC, the proposed ARC guidelines. All right. Provide feedback within, let's pick a date, by, somebody throw a date out, January 15th? No, we're busy with budget.
We're in a budget process.
We're in a budget process.
Yes, Senator.
Well, by January 24th.
Right, by January 24th.
Feedback to whom?
Feedback to.
Be the general manager, no?
No, this is a board issue.
Board issue?
The liaison?
Yeah, that's feedback to the liaison. And have the information summarized, presented, legal counsel.
So who will be summarizing this?
I will.
Cammie and I have, and Steve, with the three of us, but I'd be more than happy to summarize that information so we ensure that we are very prudent with costs for the legal.
And who submits the legal counsel? You, Doug?
Yeah.
Okay. Covers what?
Thank you.
So summarize the information for presentation to
Legal counsel.
And will we have a second motion at some point in the future to refer
Yeah,
it?
so we're actually going to revise this motion to basically lay out the process, and then Steve, just point of order, a new motion will have to come at a subsequent meeting once we have the input from council. Fair enough? All right, so everybody understand how we are making a friendly amendment to this current motion.
But just one point of clarity, I would like it to be local counsel, because I really feel like our local counsel is working with ARC consistently, and I think there are better people to review all this.
So noted. So noted.
Joe Moore, yes.
Yeah, so noted. We can make that as a requirement. Okay.
Okay.
So is there a second to, please read the friendly amendment more time.
So I move that the Ocean Pines Board of Directors direct themselves to review the proposed ARC guidelines and provide feedback to the liaison to the ARC by January 24th. And liaison who will summarize the information for review by
I would just take the words out, direct themselves. All right. Cross that out, direct themselves.
that the board is
The board
directed
review, just
that the board
motion to
review.
board review the proposed ARC guidelines, and then the rest of it can.
And local counsel.
Okay,
Got it.
all right. All right, everybody aware of the friendly amendment? So is there a second to the friendly amendment?
Second.
Any further discussion? Frank?
Just a point of clarification, okay? By January 24th, any comments that we have, if we have any, go to the liaison.
Correct.
Okay? At that point in time, the liaison sends this document to local counsel for review.
Can we specify that local counsel be
Yes.
the counsel
Joe Moore.
who currently works?
Local counsel.
by
So-
hand?
Sends the local counsel for review.
So the risk of it making it too cumbersome, we can infer that the liaison and other members of the board will summarize the information and prepare it for presentation to council.
Right, and council, council comes back to the liaison, and we get a revised document as a motion. Just to clarify.
I don't think the motion needs to say, on
that's
January 24th at 2:06 PM, we'll do the. we
I'm
don't
not
need that
suggesting
level of
any
detail.
rewording.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
So summary will be by liaison,
All right, the summary,
consultation with
President.
president and
The bylaws.
bylaws liaison.
Okay. Barry, another comment?
I'm not going to vote yes on this. I think heard our comments, back to them, whatever They're the ARC committee. Let's let them go back and take a look at this stuff. And based on their recommendations, come back to us. And then at that point, we can send it to council.
Just, Larry, point taken. I don't think our language restricts us from involving Ann and anybody on ARC in any further communications as we're doing our review. As a matter of fact, I would think that'd probably be required.
Well, that's not what the motion says. So
well, I mean, it doesn't, again, I don't automatically restrict something when it doesn't say it, okay? And I feel that we could do it unless specifically stated that we're restricted from doing it. So I think it's inferred that we would obviously be in contact with them and say, hey, give me an explanation, the practical person, give me an explanation of following. Here's how I understand your language, help me out. And you'd certainly do that. And look, guys, we can sit here and close this all day long. We could certainly have a long discussion on this. I think in deference to some of the other additional comments that want to be made, I think we've got it where we need it to be. We've asked for the friendly amendment. I think everybody understands the friendly amendment. I'd like to get a second to the friendly amendment.
Second.
Okay. And I don't think there's any further discussion.
No.
All right, seeing none, I'll call the question on the friendly amendment. All those in favor of the friendly amendment as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nay. All right, so it's 5-2. Please record it. Okay, now we bring back the original motion as amended. Any further discussion on the original motion as amended? Amended by the friendly amendment. Okay, so in essence, the friendly amendment has replaced the language of the original motion. Okay. Other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the original motion as amended by the friendly amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? 5-2. All right, so at the end of the day, we've got an action item at the board level based on the friendly amendment, and we'll carry that out. Thank you, guys. All right, next item on the agenda was added as part of the amendment to the agenda for today's meeting, and the Residence Academy, Interactive Virtual Residence Academy. Colette.
Yes. The topic is the Interactive Virtual Residence Academy. The concise statement is the Communications Advisory Committee has requested board support for their work to regenerate the Residence Academy to support educating the membership regarding the OPA governance, organizational structure, and operations background. Previous General Manager Bob Thompson developed and offered to the membership the Residence Academy to educate interested OPA members regarding the governance, organizational structure, and operations of OPA. This was a successful tool for increasing engagement of OPA members with the advisory committee and overall governance process, but the initiative went by the wayside in recent years. The Communications Advisory Committee has recommended to the board that the Academy be reconstituted as a virtual online experience available to all members. The committee is taking on the task of updating the materials and is prepared to work with the OPA Department of Marketing and Communication and the OPA North Star project manager to develop the Academy as a virtual online experience that includes interactive elements. The interactive component is expected to involve budget impact of approximately $5,000 to secure the necessary IT expertise. The committee is requesting board discussion of the merits of this initiative and its associated costs relative to the upcoming budget development and approval.
Is there a second? Discussion. Larry.
Yeah, I did attend the original Residence Academy, and it was a good way of learning as much as you could about each department in Ocean Ponds. I think it's very valuable. It was a very valuable experience for me. I'd mentioned to Colette that the thing that was most valuable was the interaction between the individuals attending and the department heads. So while I have no problem with it being done remotely or online, there's got to be the ability of the people looking at this online to interact not only with the department heads and the people that present, but also with the other members who are there. We had about 30 people in that class. So there was a lot of different perspectives and views from the community, and it generated, I learned an awful lot. So I think if we can do it online and it truly is interactive, I think it'd be great. Otherwise, I think, I hate old school, but I think having them sit down together and have the general manager program is, that interaction is really the best way to go.
Yeah, I agree pretty much with what Larry's saying. I think maybe it's a combination of both, some virtual as well as some face-to-face participation. That's how a lot of online learning goes on, I think, and that would be a better approach.
I tend to agree with Larry as well. I like the one-on-one interaction. Obviously, it got Larry involved in the board when he got down here. I mean, it was a great experience for him. I remember talking to him about it multiple times. So I would agree, keeping it. There should be some interactive things that should go on our website anyway. And once we get into North Star, I'm sure there'll be a bunch of that coming up about how to be involved with the budget process and how to do different things within the community. I think something like this, a residence academy, should be a one-on-one experience. I truly.
Yeah, I have a comment. I think maybe we ought to consider maybe the hybrid approach, where we don't necessarily abandon the one-on-one interaction, because I would agree with the previous comments here that one-on-one interaction, face-to-face is absolutely beneficial. But maybe as a follow-up, we have the material online. It can be accessed as necessary. So I think the approach would be, certainly we move forward with this, we can develop the interactive, but that doesn't prevent us from scheduling, a virtual, I'm sorry, not a virtual, but a physical academy, a meeting among those folks. So I think what this does is it adds to something that we are now able to leverage with our software environment with the new North Star system, so we can present the stuff online. But, we should probably take the responsibility to consider having a meeting that coincides with the topic material that was done the last time the quote unquote virtual academy or the residence academy was presented. So other discussion.
I guess what I'd say is I think I would agree with Larry. I mean, having something that's interactive is important, because at the end of the day, I think one of the most important things for our homeowners is to be able to get their questions answered as quickly as possible. And it goes to one of the things that John presented as the GM, his 1, 2, 3 level kind of approach, because when you answer those questions immediately, you keep these things that tend to be explosive and all-consuming in a community, you address them at the spark and brush fire level rather than at the forest fire level. So do I agree with the concept? Absolutely. I think that the more interactive and the more real-time it is, the better it is for everybody in the community. So if we can blend those two, perfect. Or some approach that blends the two, where we have a residence academy and maybe just the 1, 2, 3 kind of situation that John has created does it. But the critical thing, the two critical things that I think we see up here, and, at the risk of being, a lot of times people come up here and complain to the board and talk about things, and they're totally misinformed. Okay? I mean, how many times have we talked about, or has over the past, since I moved into community in 2013, has somebody came to this board and said, why don't you do something about MediaCom? Okay? MediaCom service, MediaCom programming, MediaCom pricing, which we have nothing to do with. So educating the community on who is responsible for what is important, but equally important is getting answers to them, to their questions, in a timely manner. I mean, as close to real time as possible.
Thank you. Other discussion? Colette?
This is really valuable input. Thank you all for your comments. I agree with the hybrid type of approach, and I'll certainly take this back to the committee. We'll look at it.
Other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of a motion to...
This was not a motion, it was a topic for discussion.
Topic for discussion.
Well, this tie must be too tight. I'm telling you,
I haven't had a tie on since you retired.
Yeah, since I retired, I haven't had a tie. Thank you, guys. Sorry. My apologies. It was a discussion and a very good one. And thank you for bringing it up, Colette.
You're welcome.
Next item on the agenda was added as part of an amended agenda, and it involves the required changes in job descriptions. Colette?
Right. The motion is to approve the following new positions: Director of Amenities and Operational Logistics and Senior Executive Assistants in accordance with bylaws sections 5.14D and 9.01B. Purpose and effect: approval of these positions will change the scope of authority and/or responsibility for two existing positions, which are Executive Assistant and Director of Operations, and support the success of the OPA organizational structure. There will be budget impact for the Senior Executive Assistant position only. Background: a comprehensive operations assessment was conducted by the General Manager in conjunction with the recently completed compensation study. The attached organizational chart reflects the organizational structure that resulted. This structure has proven its effectiveness as reflected in operational efficiencies and accomplishments achieved over the past 6 months. The Director of Amenities and Operational Logistics position replaces Director of Operations. The new position title more accurately reflects the scope of responsibility and authority that has evolved within that position over the past 6 months and carries no change in compensation. The Senior Executive Assistant position replaces Executive Assistant. This new title reflects expanded scope of responsibility and authority and carries additional compensation. The additional compensation will be realized in the 2021 fiscal year, pending budget approval by the board. The attached organizational chart also reflects title change from Director of Finance to Director of Finance and Operational Logistics, with no change in responsibilities or compensation for this position. In addition, the title for Director of Golf Operations is changed to General Manager of Golf without change in responsibilities or compensation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Larry?
I have two things. First off, we are, if I understand this correctly, we are moving to create or update 2 job descriptions. Is that correct, John? Okay. So I think what we're doing here is 2 things. We're creating or updating 2 different job descriptions based on the Simpson review, which is fine. And then on top of that, we are, since one of the positions it has a budgetary impact, we are approving that change also. So I brought this up yesterday when I reviewed this. In the job description, it says the incumbent will prepare. And this should be a generic job description. While we have 2 incumbents into these positions, the job description should read, in regard to the Director of Amenities, the Director of Amenities and Operational Logistics will prepare, not the incumbent, because there will not always be an incumbent in this job description. So I think that needs to be changed, and it needs to be changed on both job descriptions. So I think that's, and it's a technical thing, but we will not have an incumbent in these other further down the line. Besides that, yeah, I'm fine with the descriptions, but we've got to get that incumbent out of there.
Point taken, Larry. Very well. Other discussion? Frank?
Yeah, thanks, Larry, for that, kind of taking care of that little technicality. But look, this whole chart and this has been a long time coming. I mean, if I look at this, this is embodying a year's work. And as I told somebody earlier this week, to move from a damnable culture of indifference to a culture of operating excellence. And I fully support it.
Other discussion? Colette?
I think Larry's comments are appropriate, and I will recommend to the GM and the Director of HR. There's another little bit of wordsmithing that I recommended to the GM. It does not change either job.
Yeah, I would treat Larry's comments as a recommendation to the GM. It's not certainly a board level decision, but certainly guidance from the board to the GM to make those changes on the job description. Other comments? I'd like to make one, yeah, and let me follow up with what Frank said. I think, John, his team, everybody else is, looking at operationally what Ocean Pines needs, making the necessary adjustments to, the staffing and the organizational structure, as a byproduct of, a year's worth of analysis, a year's work of understanding what it's going to take to run this organization, not only now, but for the long term. So I'm in fully support of this, not only this motion, but the work that has been done to get us to this point. So I'm certainly going to vote in favor of it. Other discussion, comments? Steve?
I'll just make one comment. Risk of Tom being upset about Maryland being anyway, we'll get done. We're okay. But I really want to echo what I've had the privilege over the last year of working very closely with all the people involved in this process, the two people whose job descriptions are being impacted, as well as the GM. And we've got stellar people, and they're doing a great job. And I really think this is a great move on the part of the GM to present this, to take it forward.
Other discussion? One more.
That's my last one. I would just echo that really these guys have done incredible work. I think the GM has provided incredible leadership with respect to the concepts of cross-training and bench strength. These positions have evolved as the duties have been carried out, assigned to the individuals and carried out. They've done a stellar job as reflected in our bottom line and in the morale improvements and the overall operational efficiencies. I thank our GM and the two individuals who.
All right, seeing no more questions or no more discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve the job descriptions as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. That is the last item that we had under new business. We'll move into the next item on the agenda under appointments. We have four, two that were previously stated on the agenda and two that were added when the agenda was amended. We've got Larry Malone for chair for the ARC, Kathy Grimes extending her term on the Aquatics Committee, Gene Higgins for Parks and Recreation Committee, and then Susan Holt for the Environmental and Natural Assets Committee. I would ask the indulgence of the board, unless there's any concern with accepting all four of the appointees as once, I'd ask for a motion to accept all of the appointees named. There's a second. Second. Any discussion on any of the appointees? And now I'll call the question. All those in favor of accepting the appointees of Larry Malone as chair of ARC, Kathy Grimes an extended term for Aquatics, Gene Higgins as first term Parks and Recreation, and Susan Holt first term Environmental and Natural Assets, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?